Kate Milafalcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. And before I start, I feel like I'm trying to remember to thank everybody. Uh, I don't not appreciate people when I forget to thank them. I just distract myself. So I have to write it down and remember. So thank you all very, very much. Thank you for joining me. That always makes me happy. Thank you for subscribing. Check your subscriptions. They're doing that irregular heartbeat thing again. It's crazy. Check all of your subscriptions, not just me. Check all of the people that you like to watch. I find even my subscriptions to my friends don't happen. They disappear off the face of the earth. It's very strange. And if you have questions for Ask Your Irish Granny, if you need advice, I promise to keep it anonymous, and I print it out at SUBSTACK. So if you have questions for me, you send it to my email. And consider becoming a member. I have a lot more content in my membership. 99 cents. Cheap at half the price. Okay. Today is May 21st, and I was trying to think about what to write about. I try to keep things a little light these days, and I found a very interesting thing happened on this day. This day is in the day that's in honor of the Red Cross and Clara Barton, the woman who started the Red Cross. And this is the official day that's celebrated as Red Cross Day. And in her honor, I thought we would look at her life. Too many women have done remarkable things in the world, historically, globally. And although their name is known and people will say, oh, Florence Nightingale, yeah, nursing, Clara Barton, yeah, Red Cross. People don't fully appreciate what they had to go through to accomplish the astounding things that they did accomplish. So Clara Barton, let's talk about her. And she has a great name. Her real name is Clarissa Harlow Barton. Gotta love it. Born on Christmas Day, 1821 in North Oxford, Massachusetts. She was named, this cracked me up. I couldn't believe this. She was named after Samuel Richardson's novel, Clarissa. So this is an epistolary novel. In other words, it's put together, the whole narrative is driven in letter form. So it's all about letters back and forth that run the whole story. And the reason why this cracked me up is because at some point, I don't even remember when now, sometime in the dark ages, I was required in school to read his other novel, Pamela. And Pamela is considered to be the first true, or at least one of the first true English novels. There are other things that were written before, but as far as like the rigid structure and the character development and the way the plot unfolds, it's considered the first really, truly novel form. It was very, very popular when it was written. By Samuel Richardson, just in case you want to read it. And it's one of those books that are kind of the life and times of a hard luck girl who has, romantic problems, a broken picker, unfaithful boyfriend. It's just the whole story of what happens. It's good. It's a good book. Clara, because that was her nickname, Clara's father was Captain Stephen Barton. He was a militiaman and a select man. So there's a combination for toxic masculinity. But he instilled a strong sense of patriotism in her and humanitarianism. And I wrote, this is ironic because he was in the army that removed the indigenous people violently from the Northwest. And it's ironic that he thought that he was a leader of progressive thought. So contradictions. I don't know what to say. Her mother was Sarah Stone Barton. In 1825, when she was 3 years old, she went to school with her brother, just for giggles, I guess. And at the age of 3, she started outshining everybody older than she. She excelled in reading and spelling. She was smart. In 1832, when she was 10, her brother David fell off the roof of the barn. Nobody's mentioning why he was on the roof of the barn. That would be my question. But he had a severe head injury. He spent the next 2 years in bed with this head injury. She took care of him almost exclusively. She was only 10. She learned how to administer prescriptions, and another handy skill, she learned bloodletting with leeches. Anyway, he made a full recovery. She really resisted attending high school. She was quite shy. And she was depressed because they were forcing her to socialize when she didn't want to. And she stopped eating. So they allowed her to stay home, and she started getting better. And at that point, her family relocated. The whole family moved. Her father's cousin died, and his widow was left with 4 small children and a big farm. And so the whole family of Clara's family, so the widow's brother-in-law essentially, moved the whole family into another structure on the property and helped with the farm. And Clara helped to repair the house that they were going to move into, and she turned out to be pretty good at carpentry and construction. She did a lot of things that were atypical of women of her time and showed that gender is really not the issue here. She spent a lot of time horse riding with her male cousins because she didn't have anybody else to play with, and she got to be a really good equestrian. But she got injured at some point, and her mother decided enough is enough. This is not ladylike behavior. Look, you got hurt. That proves it. So she invited a female cousin of Clara's to move in with them to teach Clara to have more feminine skills, like be a good influence on her, a good example. And they persuaded Clara to become a school teacher. She was so smart. So she studied in a teacher's college in Clinton, New York. And in 1839, at the age of 17, she got her first teacher's certificate. She fought in a redistricting campaign for the children of workers to receive an education. She was a teacher around Oxford, Massachusetts. They sent her to all the problem places, and she fixed them for 11 years. She was very good with the children, and she was especially good with boys because she'd spent so much time with her male cousins and her brothers that she was much better at dealing with boys than a lot of the female teachers who lived a very gender isolated upbringing. In 1851, her mother died, and at that point, I don't know why, but they closed up the family home. And she went back to school in Clinton, back to that college, to pursue a career, to like get advanced training in writing and languages. She made a wide range of friends. It was sort of, she blossomed there and broadened her views, met all kinds of people. She was befriended by the principal, who saw her abilities and her hard work, and it became a romance. He was considerably older than she. She was a very clear writer. She had a talent. She was contracted to open the first free school in New Jersey. Before this, they did not have public education for free in New Jersey. If you were rich, you sent your children to private school, boarding school. And if you were poor, medium, you could maybe have tutors, but if you were poor, tough luck. She felt that was not equitable. So the city of Bordentown had no school, and it's spelled Borden like Borden milk, and I wonder, I didn't bother to look it up. I should have looked it up. I wonder if that's related to those Bordens. Anyway, she got them to build a school, and after a year, she was able to hire another woman to help, and it was these 2 women teaching 600 children. She made $250 a year. The town raised $4,000 for a new school building because they saw that this was going to be a good thing. But once it was built, they replaced Clara with a male principal, who was elected by the school board because they thought the job was unfitting for a woman. Never mind, she'd been doing it for however long. She was demoted to female assistant, and she had a nervous breakdown. It must have been a uterine problem. She imagined was devastated by the loss of her position after everything she did. She had other health issues and she quit. In 1855, she moved to Washington, D.C. by herself and became a clerk in the Federal Patent Office. She was the first woman to get a federal clerkship with equal pay to the men. So she worked for 3 years there, enduring the abuse and slander from the male clerks. They made her life a living hell. And there grew political opposition to women working in the government, and they reduced her position to copyist. So once again, she's demoted. In 1858, she was fired by Buchanan, by his administration, for Black republicanism. And I think what that meant was that she was a Republican. She was a huge supporter of Lincoln and his Republican Party, which were not the Republicans of today. There's almost the diametric opposite, but they were not the same as today. After the election of Lincoln in 1860, she was returned to the patent office, but she agreed to do it as a temporary copyist because she hoped that she'd make the way clear for more women to be working in government. In 1861, April 19th, there was the Baltimore riot, which was the first bloodshed of the Civil War. There was a group of militia, the 6th Massachusetts Militia, marching up from Massachusetts to get to Washington, D.C. And on the way, they were attacked by Confederate sympathizers, and there was a pitched battle. The injured victims were sent to the unfinished Capitol building. I got the heebie-jeebies reading this because I thought, oh my God, there are so many parallels. This is around the time of the Civil War was when the Capitol building was being built. And now what? So anyway, she lived in Washington, D.C. at the time. She heard that these injured people were being brought into the Capitol, into the shell of a building, and she wanted to help. So she went down to the railroad station and helped to collect and organize over 40 men. She provided crucial aid to the wounded and the hungry. There was no organization. There was nobody to help. There were people who volunteered, but it was disorganized. There was nobody calling the shots and, people pulling in opposite directions. There were no supplies. She personally got supplies. She bought supplies. Now we're talking bandages and sheets and linens and bedpans and that kind of thing. She realized that she knew some of these wounded militia. When she went to help them, she realized, oh my God, I grew up with that guy. These guys were my students. They were from Massachusetts. They were all volunteers from Massachusetts, and she knew them. She learned how to store and distribute medical supplies and to give emotional support. Very important. She read to them. She wrote letters back home to them, their families for them. She let them talk. She was one of the few that was willing to sit and listen to them talk about their fears and their experiences. She began collecting medical supplies for all Union soldiers, and she used her own living space, apartment or wherever she was living, to store it all. And she got her friends to help her distribute it. And the War Department and the field surgeons, of course, got all persnickety about it because who is this woman and who does she think she is? Well, what she was a blessing for them because there was nothing but chaos and no supplies. And these soldiers were dying of neglect. It was really grim. I mean, hospital conditions at that time were not even basic. They were desperate. There was a group that formed around the same time, and this is separate from her, but they worked with her, called the Ladies' Aid Society. It was all over the country. And all these women wanted to do something to help, and they formed to get and send supplies to distribute during the war. There's a scene in the movie, if anyone has seen the movie Gone with the Wind. Now, granted, you know, they were the Confederacy, but they're all sitting rolling bandages. That was a very common thing to do. Women, all these upper crust ladies would get together and roll bandages. So they'd have cotton and strips of cotton. They'd tear sheets of cotton up and they'd roll bandages. In August of 1862, Barton got the okay from the Quartermaster General, Daniel Rucker, to work on the front lines, which was a big concession. She got patronage and support from Senator Henry Wilson of Massachusetts, who was very grateful to her for what she did for the Massachusetts militia. After the first Battle of Bull Run, she realized there was a desperate unmet need for stuff, and she advertised in the paper, which was clever, and got a huge response. She organized women who went and cleaned field hospitals. And now, what are we talking about? Just every awful thing you can possibly think about, including limbs. I mean, it was awful. I've read descriptions of the real thing, and, you know, piles of them. Unbelievable. Medicine at the time was really primitive at the time. They cleaned field hospitals, they applied dressings, they fed the wounded, but they got them food, they cooked the food, they fed it to them because, you know, many of them were incapacitated and couldn't eat. And they didn't distinguish between Confederate and Union. They helped soldiers on both sides. Supplies were often scarce. For example, at the Battle of Antietam, they were reduced to using corn husks for bandages. And she made the announcement, "I shall remain here while anyone remains and do whatever comes to my hand. I may be compelled to face danger, but never fear it. And our soldiers can stand and fight. I can stand and feed and nurse them." 1863, 1864, she went with her brother David to Port Royal, South Carolina. Now, this was Confederate country, to the occupied Sea Islands. Remember Fort Sumter? And he was the quartermaster for the Navy, and he accepted her help gladly. She became friends with the abolitionist and feminist Frances Dana Barker Gage, who had traveled south to educate former enslaved people. This put her life at risk. The women who tried to start schools for former slave children were, and for adults too, who were illiterate, were often attacked. And, you know, I mean, it was terrible. She met a woman, Jean Margaret Davenport, who was an English actress who was married to a Union general, Frederick W. Lander. These names, you know, these were big shots at the time. Barton nursed Black soldiers of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment after the attack on Fort Wagner. She went to Morris Island with a Black woman who worked with her in a lot of different places. They were ordered to evacuate by General Quincy Adams Gilmore, and they refused. It was rumored that she had an affair and a romance with Colonel John J. Elwell. It's just a little hot gossip there, I guess. In 1864, she was named by Union General Benjamin Butler the lady in charge at the front at the Army of the James. This is a terrible story, this particular event here. They called it harrowing. I'd call it an absolute nightmare. She was taking care of a man in a tent, and a bullet came through and went through the fabric of her arm, of her dress. Didn't hit her, killed the man she was taking care of. She was called the Florence Nightingale of America and the angel of the battlefield. She had an uncanny ability to show up at the most desperate of moments. For example, August of 1862, she arrived at a field hospital at midnight with a large number of supplies for many severely wounded, and she helped the overwhelmed surgeons after the Battle of Cedar Mountain in Northern Virginia. She often came to save the day. She just had incredible timing. So after the war, she got the okay from Lincoln to begin what was called the search for missing men. This is really sad. If anybody remembers after Vietnam, the MIA POWs, so the prisoners of war who got left behind, and the missing in action, there was a huge push. It was an organized push to find out what happened to them, bring their bodies home or release them from whatever kind of captivity they were still in. This is kind of analogous to that, because what happened is she opened up the Office of Missing Soldiers, and this was in response to thousands of letters that came into the War Department from distraught relatives. You know, my Billy went to war and we haven't heard from him since, and he was in this and this regiment. What happened to him? People needed to know. So she made it her business to find, identify men killed or missing in action, and many of them had been buried in unmarked graves. So this meant organizing disinterment. And she wrote 41,855 replies. She got help, but she was responsible. 41,855 replies to parents and relatives and wives, assuring them that they were trying to find their loved ones. She located more than 22,000 men. In 1865, she spent the summer finding, IDing, and properly burying 13,000 who died at Andersonville Prison, a Confederate POW camp in Georgia. This is a remarkable story, one that's not discussed enough, I don't think. There is a shattering book called Andersonville. And I read this when I was in high school. I don't know. Sometimes I think I read things that were too sad, but I was shocked. It's a graphic collection of first-person narratives of what happened to Americans who were imprisoned by fellow Americans in Georgia, and it is devastating. It's well worth looking for and reading if you like history. Anyway, it took her 4 years to find 20,000 Union soldiers and to bury them in marked graves. Congress even gave her $15,000 to help her out. It was a lot of money in those days. 1865 to 1868, she became a national speaker about the war. She traveled around and talked about her experiences. She met Susan B. Anthony. She associated with big shots in the suffrage movement. She met Frederick Douglass, who was involved in the suffrage movement, but also in civil rights. She became a civil rights activist. Under doctor's orders to rest, I can't imagine why, she closed the missing soldiers office in 1868 and went to Europe. In 1869, while she was in Switzerland, she met Dr. Appia, and he invited her to be the representative of the American branch of the Red Cross. The Red Cross was started in Switzerland, and there was no Red Cross in the United States. So she brought it to the United States. And he helped her to find donors because they needed money to establish the organization. And she introduced the idea of relief organizations that were made out of volunteers and were politically neutral. And, like all of those poor people that were killed in Gaza, like the 15 relief workers, I think they were Red Crescent workers. Well, Red Crescent is the Red Cross in Islamic countries. It's exactly the same thing. It's non-religious and it's voluntary and it's a humanitarian aid. And that's what she helped start. In 1870, She went to the start of the Franco-Prussian War and helped Grand Duchess of Baden prepare military hospitals and gave aid to the Red Cross during that war there. In 1871, after the siege of Paris, she helped the poor of Strasbourg at the request of the Germans. The Germans asked her, please come and help. They were overwhelmed with poor people because of the war, and she was put in charge of distributing food and clothing and medicine to the destitute of Paris. In 1873, on her return to the United States, she tried to get the U.S. government to recognize the International Committee of the Red Cross. In 1878, she met with President Hayes, and he told her that America would never have another civil war, so we don't need the Red Cross. And then, she still kept fighting, and then Chester Arthur became president, and she convinced him that, okay, well, maybe we won't have another war. She was placating him. But, the Red Cross could be a big help to the government in disasters. And so he said, okay, you can be in charge, and made her the president of the American branch of the Red Cross. The first meeting was held in her apartment, May 21st, 1881. The very first local group that was officially formed was in Dansville, New York. She had a country home there, and that's why it was there. During the Spanish-American War, she aided refugees and prisoners, and the grateful people of Santiago built a statue of Clara Barton in the town square after the war. It's still there. She reported in U.S. papers about the Red Cross. She did a big PR thing. And then she quietly went on, and this litany of what she did is just remarkable. Now, the Red Cross was there, and there was an organization of people helping her, but she was at the front of the whole thing, driving it. 1884, the floods of the Ohio River. 1887, the famine in Texas. I didn't know there was a famine in Texas in 1887. 1888, there was a huge tornado in Illinois. They were there. 1888 in Florida, there was a yellow fever outbreak. They were there. 1889, the Johnstown flood. She brought in 50 doctors and nurses, and they stayed, and they formed the Conemaugh Health System, where there previously had not been health service. In 1896, and this is a big one, the Hamidian massacres of the Ottoman Empire, the Armenian genocide. Of course, Turkey won't call it that, but that's what it was. She went to Constantinople and ran the aid for these poor people. 1898, now this was not the same as the one that happened in 1912, but there were periodic genocidal massacres in the Ottoman Empire and Turkey, specifically over about a 20-year period until World War I broke out and they got distracted. 1898, the Cuban hospitals needed her, and she went there to help. She was 77. This reminds me of Mother Jones, Florence Nightingale. In 1900, she helped at the Galveston hurricane, and she established an orphanage there. She was forced to resign for using her own resources to help. They were like, well, that's against the laws of nonprofit organizations. So she wasn't benefiting, she was giving, but it violated, the emoluments law. No, I'm kidding. So what really happened, now that people look back on it, there was a rising group of young male science experts who forced her out for the purposes of efficiency and because her leadership was egocentric. She was a woman telling men what to do. The Red Cross headquarters was founded because of the courageous women of the Civil War. After resigning, she founded the National First Aid Society. Can't have too much help, right? In 1897, she had moved to Glen Echo, Maryland, and her house was the Red Cross headquarters, of course. In 1908, she wrote her autobiography, The Story of My Childhood. 4 years later, in 1912, April 12th, at the age of 90, she died of pneumonia. Now, she was interesting. I looked up a little bit more about her. She had very strong Christian beliefs. She believed in divine providence. This is this belief system that God's intervention determines what happens in your life. For example, she believed that Lincoln's election was because of divine intervention, divine providence. She always used to say, God's will, not mine. She's identified with, but was not an active member of the Universalist Church, which had the belief that all humans are destined for salvation. You know, no one's going to hell, in other words. Very similar to Unitarianism. She was a big supporter of Lincoln's Republican Party, but she wasn't political. She was all about social justice, but not about politics, which intersect, but are not always the same thing. Barton's home eventually became the Clara Barton National Historical Site. In 1997, the Office of the Missing Soldiers had been long abandoned. And it was in this really old building, and it got empty, and nobody was doing anything to maintain it. And they decided they were going to demolish it. And a guy went in to clear it out and discovered in the old office of missing soldiers a treasure trove of personal belongings of Clara Barton. And so he alerted the archaeological authorities, and they saved the building, and it finally was restored. It took them a really long time to restore it, but it opened as the National Museum of Civil War Medicine in 2015. I think that would be a really interesting museum to go to. And this is in Washington, D.C., I think. There are numerous depictions on television and in movies and books of her life. She was buried in the family plot in the North Cemetery in Oxford, Massachusetts. And that is the remarkable life of Clara Barton. Clarissa Harlow Barton. Okay, that's all I have for today. And so we should all take a moment and feel grateful for the Red Cross and the Red Crescent and the National First Aid Society and any of the people that show up when nobody else wants to, when things are demolished and there's no working toilet. They show up to help. So, slán go fóill, sláinte.